Finally, a leader came to the throne that combined political astuteness with sensitivity towards the Creator. Not only did Josiah continue the policies of his father Hezekiah, another popular king, but he also initiated a religious reform unmatched during the period of the divided kingdom. Yet, during a significant military attack, King Josiah died an untimely death. According to the historian of 2 Kings, no other king would rise to match the level of Josiah's success, and eventually the Babylonian captivity began. One might expect that all hope was lost, and a reading of the remainder of 2 Kings seems to imply this. Nonetheless, as Jenhee Han will emphasize, it is clear that the presence of God remained with the people of God, preserving a final word of hope. One of the enduring messages of this text is that our hope always resides in the continual presence of God and not in the performance of any political leader.
The latter days of Judah leading up to the exile have a shape of a downward spiral in which the nation is being pulled into the vortex of a violent destruction. On this steep slope to destruction, the history of Judah witnessed the rise of one bright star that lit up the dark world of impending doom and the exile. It was King Josiah. Josiah came to the throne in 640 BCE as a young king of 8 years old after two of the worst kings in Judean history, Manasseh and Amon. Manasseh tried to undo the reforms Hezekiah, his father, had initiated. Manasseh topped the sins of the past kings by introducing the worship of other gods inside the very temple of Jerusalem, in which God had chosen to make the divine name dwell. Amon turned out to be a carbon copy of his father, only to be assassinated by his own courtiers in the second year of his reign. When the dynasty of David hung on the balance, the people of the land, Am Haaretz, probably landed gentry, emerged to the scene, executed the assassins, and put Josiah, the young king, on the throne. In the 18th year of Josiah's reign, that is in 622 BCE, in the course of temple repair, possibly temple cleansing, a scroll containing the book of the law was discovered. Josiah responded to the contents of the book with contrition and launched the most sweeping reform in the history of Israel ever on the basis of this newly discovered book of the law. Along with King Josiah, the whole nation renewed its covenant with the Lord to keep the commandments in the book of the law, now as the book of the covenant. Josiah purged all the alien cultic objects from the temple of Jerusalem. He demolished the local sanctuaries called the Bamot, high places, and removed the cultic functionaries throughout Judah. Under Josiah, Jerusalem once again became the center of worship in the nation, a place the Lord chose for God's name to dwell. Josiah's reform involved political expansion. He took his reform beyond the borders of Judah. He dismantled the high place at Bethel that Jeroboam, the first king of the northern kingdom, built after the division of the united monarchy in 922 BCE. Josiah removed all the high places in Samaria and the priests of the local sanctuaries in the former kingdom of Israel, now under Assyrian control. Josiah's action was tantamount to the declaration of independence from Assyria. Upon his return to Jerusalem, Josiah celebrated the national Passover in accordance with the Book of the Covenant in a manner that had never been done before. With the national celebration of Passover, Josiah revitalized the historical memory of God's deliverance from the bondage of Egypt. Under Josiah, Judah regained religious vitality and love for the Torah once again. All this was made possible by the discovery of the Book of the Covenant in the temple. The kind of reforms Josiah launched suggest that the Book of the Law was some form of the Book of Deuteronomy. For example, where can one read of a special emphasis on the blessings of the covenant and the threat of punishment for the breach of the covenant? Deuteronomy. Where can one find mention of the central place of worship where the Lord God will choose? Deuteronomy. According to the book of Exodus, the Passover is to be celebrated at home. So, what book prescribes the celebration of the Passover at the place that the Lord your God will choose as a dwelling for his name? Deuteronomy. The substance of Josiah's reform fits so well with the teachings of Deuteronomy that it is dubbed the Deuteronomistic reform. And some even suspected that Josiah's court scribes fabricated the document as an ancient case of pious fraud. The historian of 2 Kings gives the highest review to Josiah, who inspired Israel to renew its covenantal devotion to God. Before him, there was no king like him who turned to the Lord with all his heart, with all his soul, and with all his might, according to all the law of Moses, nor did any like him arise after him. This utmost praise may represent a case of hyperbole born out of a sheer unbound joy, as the historian also said about Hezekiah, that there was no king like him before him or after him. However, there is one striking feature in the historian's praise for Josiah. The historian touts Josiah's piety as one with all his heart, with all his soul, and with all his might. When a similar phrase appears elsewhere in the Bible, it is a doublet like, with all your heart, with all your soul. This a triple devotion of all heart and all soul and all might is found nowhere else in the entire Old Testament except in the Shema in Deuteronomy chapter 6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. This suggests that from Deuteronomy all the way to 2 Kings, there was only one person who loved the Lord with all his heart, with all his soul, and with all his might, as the Torah commanded. That was King Josiah. In 609 BCE, Josiah learned that Pharaoh Necho II was marching through Canaan to Mesopotamia under the pretext of assisting its former ally, Assyria. By that time, Assyria is all but gone, and Necho is more interested in having a part in post-Assyrian international politics of the known world than helping anybody. Josiah went out to Megiddo to stop Necho and was killed in the Battle of Megiddo. With the death of the king, the reform came to an abrupt end. The pious king's death dealt a terrible blow to the momentum of the Josianic Renaissance. The tragedy also proved to be a theological conundrum. How could God let such a good king as Josiah die so abruptly? Evidently, the historian of 2 Kings also struggled with the same question. The historian answered his question this way: still the Lord did not turn from the fierceness of his great wrath by which his anger was kindled against Judah, because of all the provocations with which Manasseh had provoked him. Manasseh's guilt was so grave that justice was exacting its due. While some may find this explanation feeble, the historian is here underscoring one important element in his philosophy of history. Both blessings and disasters are in the hands of the Lord, and the history is governed by God's demand for justice. Though a good king died tragically, that does not signal God's defeat. Josiah died, but not in vain. For even that confirms that God will not let the guilt of the nation go unresolved. After the demise of Judah's last great king, the history of the nation went downhill rather precipitously. The best of the kings would have struggled to keep the nation together. But the last days of Judah had no such benefit. As the historian of 2 Kings and the prophet Jeremiah testified together. Jeremiah, who received his call during the reign of the pious King Josiah, found the last kings of Judah falling far short of the stature of Josiah. Under the reign of these last kings, the people were oblivious to their dire situation. Instead, they were insulated by a false sense of security, saying, "Peace, peace," when there was no peace. The people believed that the temple would provide protection and chanted, "This is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord." In unequivocal terms, Jeremiah declared the destruction of a people who would not change their behavior. Without a clear vision, these final kings conducted suicidal opportunistic diplomacy, switching allegiance between Egypt and Babylon. When Zedekiah, the last king of Judah, made the wrong calculation in this game of international cat and mouse and revolted against Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar came down hard. And after a 3-year siege, the city of Jerusalem was overrun. As Jeremiah and other prophets had warned, the time of judgment finally came to Jerusalem in 587 BCE. The temple was burned down and the city was destroyed. King Zedekiah had to witness the death of his sons and was taken into exile, blind and chained. The Babylonians carried away the vessels of the temple and deported the leadership and skilled classes of the population, leaving behind the poorest of the land. The prophecy of doom came true. One might be tempted to abandon the history book of Israel in the face of this catastrophe and despair. Yet reading the words of Jeremiah along with the last chapter of 2 Kings, there is the clear sense that the fall of Jerusalem, in spite of its devastating impact, does not mean the defeat of God's plan. Disaster did eventually come to Judah, but the prior warning of the prophets enabled the people to understand the yoke of exile as part of God's governance. As Jeremiah saw the exile only as a temporary stage in history, he could preach hope with confidence and practice hope by purchasing the field at Anathoth on the very eve of the destruction of the nation. In the wake of the faith-shattering event of the exile, it is easy to imagine that the historian of 2 Kings has nothing further to say. At that very moment, however, as if refusing to let the readers go without hearing about hope, the historian of 2 Kings mentions one small detail. In the 37th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month, King Evil-Merodach of Babylon, in the year that he began to reign, released King Jehoiakim of Judah from prison. It is as if the writer is saying, "Psst, hey, have you heard? King Jehoiakim is being released." The book ends with this fleeting note of hope. It is a slender hope, but hope nonetheless. A hope that has inspired the people to go on beyond the last stroke of the book into a future that God still promises.